Texas Hill Country, March 1878. The wind was still cold from winter when Eliza Kittredge was thrown out of her late husband's family home with nothing but a threadbare shawl and her 2 children clinging to her skirts. "You're not blood," her mother-in-law had snapped, voice as sharp as a branding iron. "And you've no place here now that Benjamin's gone. We ain't feeding you and your brats anymore." The door slammed behind her, and that was that. Eliza stood on the dusty porch, heart pounding, arms wrapped around 6-year-old Beau and 4-year-old Bonnie. Her husband had been dead just 3 months, taken by a fever that burned through him in 2 days. She hadn't even finished mourning when they turned on her. She looked down at her children. Beau was trying not to cry, jaw clenched like his father's had been. Bonnie was silent, her thumb in her mouth, eyes wide and confused. They started walking because there was nothing else to do. Her feet throbbed in her worn boots and her hands ached from carrying Bonnie when her legs gave out. They slept under trees, covered in her skirts, and drank from creeks. By the 4th day, Beau stopped asking where they were going. By the 6th, Eliza could barely hold Bonnie, and Beau had a cough that scratched like sand in his throat. On the 7th day, she collapsed by the edge of a river, her limbs refusing to move. Her children huddled beside her, silent and scared. She thought maybe they would all die right there, under the wide Texas sky. But then hooves thundered in the distance. Eliza forced her eyes open. A tall man on horseback emerged from the trees. His face was strong, serious, paint streaked faint across his cheeks. His long black hair was braided back, and his eyes, dark and watchful, took her in. He dismounted without a word and crouched beside her. "Eliza," she rasped. "My name is Eliza, please my children." The man looked at the children first. He touched Beau's forehead, felt the heat, then gently took Bonnie's hand. He said something in Comanche to someone behind him. 2 more riders appeared. One was an older woman, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes kind and fierce. She lifted Bonnie into her arms with practiced ease. Eliza tried to sit up, but the man pressed a hand to her shoulder. "You are safe," he said quietly. Who are you?" "My name is Sani Haskel. I am chief of my band." She blinked, trying to understand. "Why would you help us?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you need it." Eliza passed out before she could say another word. She woke in a warm lodge, heavy blankets over her, the scent of herbs and smoke in the air. Beau and Bonnie were curled beside her, sleeping. A fire crackled low at the center of the lodge. Sani sat near it, his hands resting on his knees. Eliza pushed herself up slowly, heart pounding. "Where are we?" "My home," he said. "We brought you here 4 days ago. You were very sick." "My children, they are well now. Your son's fever is gone." "Your daughter eats like a fox." Eliza let out a shaky breath and looked down at her lap. "I have nothing left." Sani studied her. "You have them." She looked up, eyes stinging. "Why are you being kind to us?" He did not answer right away. Then he said, "When I was a boy, white men burned our lodges. My mother hid us in a cave. A settler woman found us after and brought food. She had no reason, only heart." Eliza stared at him. "You are returning that kindness." He held her gaze. "No. I am choosing to help you." The days passed slowly after that. Sani's people did not treat her with suspicion. They brought her food, showed her how to grind corn, how to dry meat. The older woman called Loma taught Eliza how to sew hides with bone needles. Bonnie followed Loma everywhere like a duckling. Beau learned to ride a pony from the boys, his laughter echoing across the grass. Sani watched them from a distance most days. He was a quiet leader, firm but fair. When he did speak to Eliza, it was with care, never pushing, never assuming. One morning she found him by the river. "Thank you," she said. "You do not need to thank me," he said, not looking up from where he was cleaning a fish. "I do. You saved us." He glanced at her now, his face unreadable. "You would have done the same." She shook her head. "I do not know if I would have." He studied her. "You are stronger than you know." Weeks turned to months. Eliza's hands grew calloused. Her skin darkened from the sun. She learned the language slowly, haltingly, enough to understand jokes, to reassure the children. Beau no longer asked when they were going back. Bonnie called Loma Grandma without hesitation, and Eliza began to smile again. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, she found Sani sitting outside his lodge alone, the stars bright overhead. She sat beside him without asking. He glanced at her, then back to the sky. "They are loud tonight," she smiled. "Bonnie snores like her father." He turned to her. "Do you miss him?" Eliza was quiet for a long time. "I did. I mourned him, but he was not kind to me. I stayed because I thought it was what a wife should do." Sani's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" She nodded once. "Not with fists, but he made me feel small. His family made me feel like I was only worth what I could do for them." Sani was quiet. Then he said, "You are not small." She looked at him. "And you do not treat me like I am broken. Because you are not." Their eyes held for a long time, something unspoken passing between them like wind through grass. She reached out, fingers brushing his hand. He did not pull away. That night she dreamed of warmth, of hands on her waist, of being seen, truly seen, and when she woke, her heart knew something her mind had not yet dared to say. She was falling in love. Rain had fallen through the night, soft and steady. By morning, the ground held the scent of wet earth and crushed cedar. Eliza stood by the smoke hole of the lodge, watching damp mist rise where the sun touched the grass. Her hands worked a length of sinew through a deer hide pouch, the needle clutched tight between her fingers. Bonnie sat cross-legged near the fire pit, humming tunelessly as she stacked wooden pieces into a lopsided tower. Bo was off with the older boys, sent to gather willow bark. He'd asked permission before going, eyes flicking to her for approval, something he'd never done back at the ranch. Loma ducked into the lodge with a wrapped bundle in her arms, droplets clinging to her sleeves. She set the parcel beside Eliza and unwrapped it. Inside lay a folded length of woven cloth, dyed with crushed berries and river clay. The colors ran deep blue and rust red, patterned with bands like wind across water. "For you," Loma said, brushing rain from her brow. Eliza blinked. "It's beautiful. You'll wear it tomorrow," Loma said, her tone firm but not unkind. Eliza looked down at the cloth again. "What's happening tomorrow?" Loma gave a small nod toward the lodge entrance. "The council meets to honor the spring hunt. Sani wants you there." "I don't belong at something like that." Then he would not have asked. She left before Eliza could argue. That evening, Sani returned with Bo beside him, both of them carrying woven baskets filled with bark and dry moss. Bo's cheeks were flushed from the cold, his eyes lit with pride. He handed the basket to Eliza and stood taller as he did. "He found the good kind," Sani said, setting his own basket down. "From the bend near the mesquite grove." Eliza ran her fingers through her son's hair, damp with sweat. "You remembered what they showed you?" Bo nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting a little before he ducked out of the lodge to find Bonnie. Sani stayed behind, his gaze resting on the cloth folded on the ground. "You saw what Loma brought." "I did." He waited, his expression unreadable. "I don't want to offend anyone," Eliza said after a moment. "I don't know the ways. You know how to listen. That is enough." She set her sewing aside and stood. "What does it mean, being there tomorrow?" He didn't look away. "It means you are no longer a guest." A slow breath left her chest, part fear, part something else. "It's hard to accept kindness without giving anything back. You care for the children, you help Loma, you've given more than you see." Eliza hesitated, then asked, "What about you?" "What have I given you?" Sani's gaze held hers. "You stayed." Outside, the wind rustled the lodge flaps. Eliza stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I'm not sure what I'm becoming here." "You are becoming what you were meant to be." She reached out, not touching him, just closing the space between them. "It frightens me," he nodded. "It should." Sani turned then and stepped out into the night, the flap falling closed behind him. Eliza stood alone for a long time, her pulse steady and sure. The next morning she wore the cloth as Loma had shown her, wrapped at the waist, tied across the shoulder. She left her hair loose, brushed but plain. When they reached the clearing, a low fire burned in the center, and the scent of roasted game hung in the air. Families gathered in a wide circle, some seated, some standing with arms crossed or resting on hips. Children darted between legs, laughing. Sani stood already among the others, speaking with a man Eliza hadn't seen before a hunter, judging by the antler strung around his wrist. When he saw her enter the circle, Sani's words stopped. The hunter turned to look, then stepped aside. Sani crossed the space between them. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He offered his hand, palm up. It was not a demand, not a command, just an invitation. Eliza placed her hand in his. They stepped into the circle together. That night, after the food was shared and the stories told, Eliza lay beside her children, awake long after their breathing slowed. The lodge was quiet save for the crackle of dying embers. Her hand ached from the weaving she'd done that day, but she didn't mind the sting. Outside, soft footsteps approached. She didn't move until the flap opened and Sani's shadow appeared. He knelt, setting a wrapped bundle near her feet. "For your hands," he said. "Juniper balm." She sat up, taking it. "Thank you." He didn't leave. Instead, he said, "The day you arrived, I thought you would not stay, that you would leave when you could walk again." "I thought the same," she said, "but you didn't." Eliza looked down at the balm, then up at him. "Because you saw me when I didn't know who I was anymore." He nodded once. "And now, I want to stay." He reached forward, not to touch her, but to rest his hand on the earth between them. "I will build you a lodge," he said, "next to mine." Eliza touched the place where his hand met the ground. "You don't need to," she whispered. "I want to." His voice was steady. "I would stand beside you, in every season." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she laid her hand over his. The new lodge rose slowly over the course of many days, each task done with care, no rush, no waste. Sani worked beside two other men, one of them his cousin, the other a boy just old enough to be trusted with tying frame poles. Eliza watched from a distance that first morning, Beau at her hip, Bonnie on Loma's lap nearby. She said nothing, but her chest ached with the quiet weight of how deliberate it all felt. She didn't ask to help. Instead, she brought water when the sun reached its peak and left it without a word. The men nodded their thanks, and that was enough. That evening, Sani came to sit with her near the cook fire while Bonnie picked burrs from Loma's skirt and Beau practiced shaping sinew into loops. "You'll have your own hearth before the next moon," he said. Eliza stirred the pot with the flat of a carved spoon. "Does it feel strange?" "Building with someone else in mind? I've never done it before." The spoon paused. "And you're certain it's what you want?" "I would not offer if I weren't." She nodded once and resumed stirring, the scent of rabbit and sage rising in the steam. When the frame was set and the hides stretched, she helped sew the seams. Loma showed her how to fold the edges tight, how to drive the bone needle at just the right angle so the stitch held through wind and rain. Her fingers bled where the skin was soft, but she didn't flinch. By the time they moved in, the air held the first edge of summer. The grass thickened underfoot, and the river ran fast with snowmelt. The children took to the new space without hesitation. Bonnie arranged her carved animals in a tidy row along the inner wall, whispering to each as she set it down. Beau asked Sani if he could hang his braided rope near the door, "So I can grab it fast if I need it." Sani only nodded, and Beau hung it with a solemn air. That night, after the children had curled into their blankets and the fire inside had burned low, Eliza stood outside the lodge, looking toward the stars. The air was still, quiet. Sani stepped beside her. "You're not sleeping." "I'm listening." "To what?" "I don't know yet." He folded his arms. "My mother used to say that silence is where truth waits. Maybe that's what I'm trying to hear." He looked at her then, not with question but with recognition. "You were never meant to live small." Eliza turned toward him. "I used to believe I had to. You don't now." She looked back at the night sky, then down to the earth beneath her bare feet. "I don't think I knew what it meant to be safe until I was here." Sani didn't speak, but he reached for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers lacing without effort. The warmth of his palm wrapped around her knuckles and neither of them moved. In the days that followed, Eliza began teaching Bonnie to grind corn with a rhythm that made the girl giggle. Bo returned from a morning out with 2 small fish and a scraped knee, proud as a man twice his age. At dusk, Sani carved a new bow for the boy, showing him how to test the draw with care. One afternoon, while Loma and Eliza prepared dried berries for storage, the older woman paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "He listens to you," Loma said. Eliza glanced up. Sani, Loma nodded. "He never did that before." Eliza lowered her gaze. "I'm not trying to change him. You haven't. You've steadied him." Later that evening, as the children dozed and the firelight carved shadows on the lodge walls, Eliza sat beside Sani, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He worked a length of wood smooth with a stone tool, the steady scrape filling the silence. "I want to learn more of your language," she said. He looked up. "Why now?" "Because I don't want the children to grow up between 2 worlds without understanding either." He set the wood aside. "Then I'll teach you." She leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. "And you'll tell me if I say something foolish," he smiled, a slow curve that reached his eyes. "Only if you say it twice." She laughed soft and low, the sound surprising her with its ease. "Then I'll be careful." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to be careful with me." She leaned into his touch, her voice barely above breath. "I know." The warmth between them held, steady and certain. And in that stillness, Eliza felt something settle inside her, not like an ending, but like a root taking hold in soil that would never turn her out. The summer heat unfurled slow and steady, drawing the scent of wild sage from the hills and thickening the air with a hum of insects. Eliza rose before first light most mornings, working beside Loma in the gardens the women kept east of camp. The soil, turned long ago by hands that knew its moods, gave back squash and beans in thick clusters. Eliza had never planted anything before, not with her own hands, not in a way that mattered, but here, the work felt like something sacred. She didn't mind the sweat or the ache in her shoulders. She minded how easily time passed without her noticing. One early afternoon, Sani returned from a hunt with a pair of rabbits tied to his saddle and a stiffness in his stride that made Eliza frown. He dismounted slowly, favoring his side. She stepped down from the lodge's doorway. "What happened?" Rattler spooked the horse. "I landed wrong." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be walking on it." Sani pressed a hand to his hip and exhaled through his nose. "It's not broken." "That doesn't mean it shouldn't be wrapped." He watched her quietly as she took the rabbits from him and handed them off to Bo. Her hands were already reaching for the pouch of salve. She kept near the fire when he spoke again. "You act like someone who's done this before." She pulled a strip of clean cloth from the woven basket beside the bedrolls. "My husband broke his arm once falling from a wagon. I set it and wrapped it. He told me I'd done it wrong, then passed out." Sani eased down to sit. "You ever think of leaving him?" She looked at the cloth in her hands. "Every day after the first month," he waited, not speaking over her silence. "But I had no money, no family. And no one would have taken me in with 2 children." She began wrapping his thigh, careful but firm. "I told myself I was lucky he didn't drink." Sani's voice was low. "Lucky is a cruel word." She tied the cloth, sat back on her heels, and met his eyes. "It was the only one I had." He reached forward then, slowly, and rested his hand at the bend of her elbow. "You have more now." That night, after Bo and Bonnie had curled into sleep and the fire threw long shadows against the lodge walls, Eliza found herself sitting with Sani again, her knees drawn close beneath her shift. The air outside had cooled and the coyotes called from somewhere beyond the ridge. He glanced toward the children. "You've taught them to look people in the eye. They need to know they're allowed." He nodded once, thoughtful. "Bonnie asked me today if I would braid her hair like Loma does. She trusts you." She said it without blinking. Eliza smiled faintly. "She doesn't remember a time she couldn't." Sani stretched his leg out slow, careful of the wrap. "I never thought I'd raise anyone else's children." "You don't have to," she said. "They're mine." He didn't look away. "I want to," her breath caught not sharply but like something long held finally coming loose. "I never expected this," she said. "Neither did I." She studied him in the firelight, his features drawn in warm relief. "Do you think your people will accept it? They already have." Eliza looked down, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. "I was told I had no place." "You were told wrong." She lifted her head. "And if I'm still learning how to believe that," he reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the curve of her wrist, "then I will say it until you do." She didn't answer, only leaned into the space between them, letting her forehead rest against his shoulder. His arm came around her without hesitation. Outside, the wind shifted through the grass, and the stars blinked steady above them. Inside the lodge, the children slept with their faces turned toward the fire. Eliza closed her eyes and let herself be held, not out of need, but out of choice. There was no uncertainty in her now, no waiting, no fear of being cast out again. This was her place. And she was home by late summer. The wind shifted in the evenings, bringing a dry hush that curled the edges of leaves and sent birds lower in the trees. The children rose slower in the mornings now, their limbs stretched long with growth. Eliza noticed how Beau's voice had deepened by a note, how Bonnie no longer reached for her hand before crossing a clearing. One morning, while gathering wild mint along the creek, Eliza spotted a shape farther upstream, 2 riders, moving slow, not Comanche. She crouched low, fingers tightening around her basket. The men dismounted near the bend, their boots foreign against the riverbed, one of them laughing too loud for the hush of the place. She turned back quickly, weaving through the brush and not stopping until the lodge came into view. Sani was near the horses, checking hooves. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. He looked up the moment her feet touched the packed earth. 2 white men by the creek, she said, breath thin. Didn't look like traders. He set the hoof down gently and straightened. "Anyone else see them?" "No." He didn't speak again until he'd saddled his horse. "I'll follow their trail. If they come near camp, we'll know before they do." "I'll tell Loma," Eliza said. "She'll keep the children close." Sani mounted, his hand brushing her shoulder briefly. Then he was gone, disappearing through the trees with the quiet grace that always made her breath catch. By dusk, he returned with dust on his sleeves and a branch caught in his braid. He went straight to Eliza, where she stood pegging out hides behind the lodge. "They were surveyors," he said. "Marking for a cattle fence. 2 days from here, they won't circle back." Eliza exhaled, her fingers turning slack. "They didn't see me. They weren't looking." She nodded, then said, "When I first came here, I thought I'd never stop looking over my shoulder. You don't have to anymore." Her voice was quieter now. "I believe you." The days stretched slower after that, the river running low, the light turning amber by late afternoon. The people began to prepare for the fall migration toward the canyons farther south, where shelter and game would be steadier through winter. Eliza washed their belongings by the river, folding each blanket with care. Bonnie helped, her small hands pressing the fabric smooth, her face serious with the duty. One evening, Sani returned from scouting the southern trail and found Eliza sorting through the last of the dried roots. She looked up as he approached, brushing her palms on her skirt. "I'd like to marry you," he said without pause. She blinked once, then lowered the bundle in her hands. "I didn't think you'd ask. I thought it had already happened." "It has," he said. "But I want the words said out loud." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Not for them, for you." She studied his face. "What would it look like?" He reached into the leather pouch at his belt and brought out a single strand of woven horsehair, dyed with ash and ochre. "We'd tie this between our wrists, then we'd speak what we choose." "That's all." "That's enough." She took the strand from his hand, her fingers brushing his knuckles. "Then yes." The following morning, Loma braided Bonnie's hair with bits of red thread, humming low under her breath. Beau stood near the fire, watching Sani sharpen a blade with a focus he rarely showed. No one made a fuss. There were no drums, no crowd gathered. Just the 2 of them, standing beneath the cedar tree with the sun filtering gold through the needles. Sani tied one end of the strand around her wrist, and she did the same to his. "I will walk beside you through every season," he said. Eliza looked up at him. "And I'll meet you in every one." They didn't kiss, not there. But his hands lingered at her waist once the strand was tied, and her forehead rested against his chest for a long, quiet moment. As the migration began, Eliza rode beside him, Bonnie tucked in the blanket behind her, Bo leading his pony with pride. The trail was slow, the camp moving like a living thing, measured, deliberate, rooted in rhythm. At night they slept close, the children curled safely between them. By the time the first frost came, they had reached the mesas where the wind sang low between the rocks. The new camp circled tighter, the fires burned longer. Eliza helped build the winter shelters, her hands sure now, her back stronger than it had ever been. She taught Bonnie how to patch worn moccasins, and Bo spent afternoons learning to read the tracks in the dust. Sani began carving a cradle board, slow and careful. One evening, Eliza asked who it was for. He didn't look up from the wood. "Ours." She didn't speak for a long time, only knelt beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. The fire cracked and the wind whispered against the hide walls. That winter, the child came quiet and strong, her eyes dark and wide. Loma named her Tiva, after the word for song carried on snow. Bonnie held her first, whispering promises into the baby's ear. Bo carved her a rattle from cedar and tied a strip of Sani's old blanket to it. Eliza healed slow, but she was not alone. Every night Sani lay beside her, their daughter tucked between them. He never asked if she was content. He didn't have to. Years passed and the seasons turned over like pages. Bonnie grew into a weaver, quick-fingered and bold-eyed. Bo became a man with quiet strength, his father's steadiness in his spine. Tiva learned to walk beneath the same trees where Eliza had once wept with hunger and fear. Now, that place held only laughter and the sound of her feet chasing beetles across the stones. Eliza never returned to the ranch. She never needed to. Sani built her a bench beneath the cedar tree where she sat each morning with her tea, watching the sun crest the hills. He joined her most days, their knees pressed together, their hands always finding each other. "You were my beginning," he told her once. She smiled, lines creasing gently at the corners of her eyes. "And you were my second chance." They never left that place, not because they couldn't, because they didn't want to. And in the quiet strength of their days, in the warmth of each shared meal, each whispered word between dusk and sleep, they lived the life they'd once only reached for, together. Always.